Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced, and you're listening to DevRel and Dev Advocacy, the podcast, or the DevRel Dev Advocacy podcast. And today what I want to talk about is one of the things when you're doing like DevRel and Dev Advocacy, I mean, you're generally kind of hitting up a few different steps. You're building a community, you are creating content, and then also evangelizing. So you're not only just creating like written content and maybe audio and video content, but you are also going out there and speaking. And this is one of those areas where you have a little bit less control over. Like I can always write more content. I can always do another video. I can always start a podcast. These are things that are in my control. Now, whether a conference or a meetup decides to have me as a speaker, a little bit less under my control. Okay, so this is oftentimes one of those things where you're just like, okay, I want to go speak at a meetup. I want to go speak at a conference, but how do I get started? How do I get the ball rolling? And whatnot. And there's going to be a variety of things that you can do to do this. First is identifying what are the right kind of conferences for you. A really good place to start is just by signing up for a free Sessionize account. So Sessionize is a platform where conferences can organize and get applications for speakers. So basically most conferences are using this nowadays, or a lot of them, or at least a lot of the big ones. So it makes it really easy for you to submit to conferences because you can kind of organize all your different talks and all your abstracts and all your headshots and all this stuff in sort of one place, and then just apply to events that are on the platform. And you can easily put in keywords and say, hey, these are the kind of things I like to talk about, and it'll kind of recommend events for you. That doesn't necessarily mean you will get accepted, but one thing to do is it'll help you be aware of the events. And then one thing you want to do is take a look at the website for the event and take a look at their previous year's events and take a look at like what kind of talks were there, who were the speakers, and try to see, hey, sort of what are the markers, like what are the accomplishments of these speakers that sort of make them stand out? What are the topics that they're talking about, and why are they interesting that they got selected? And then also watch some of the talks so you can see how they present. So you can see, okay, hey, these are sort of the three things that I got to work on. How do I kind of have that same sort of profile? 2, how do I have a topic ideas that sort of kind of hit this sort of level of curiosity and interest and things like that. And final, just delivering talks. So far as like improving your ability to speak and deliver, that's very much under your control. That you can just do by creating content. I've improved my speaking ability a lot over the years, not just from public speaking. I mean, I did work as a corporate trainer in finance for 10 years. So I spent 10 years literally traveling around the world, training people for financial licensing exams, which certainly helped. But also you can just making the girth of content that I make, especially audio-wise, whether it's through podcasts or videos, also helped. It was just more excuses for me to talk, more excuses for me to learn how to sort of form ideas on the fly. So nowadays, like when I record a podcast like this is just me speaking at the spur of the moment. There's zero prep because I do so much speaking. I've gotten used to sort of being able to sort of take what's going on in my head and form it into something that I can sort of splurge out. I can do it faster. I can kind of come up with something to say and come up with a way to say it that is not boring or monotone or whatnot. So that just comes with experience. Okay, so again, you're not going to necessarily get accepted to every conference and accepted in every meetup's not going to be banging at your door. But what you can do is you can start a podcast. You can you do your own sort of webinar series or live stream series and begin doing presentations. So preparing slide decks and delivering presentations either through like scheduling like LinkedIn events or Twitter live streams, or doing both using something like a Restream or a StreamYard, and just start putting content out there, getting your name out there. Okay, and then this also gives you a way to sort of test different topics. So you can see sort of which are the topics that people tend to gravitate towards. So you can say, okay, hey man, a lot of people really engaged with this particular content. So maybe that's what I should be submitting for speakerships. Okay, now one thing that certainly helps, again, is your profile. So in the sense that like not only do you want to work on the content you put out there, but working on your profile. So having things you can kind of state as, hey, look, I did this. Okay, so sometimes just speaking at A meetup is something you can kind of say, hey, I've spoken at this meetup. So usually meetups are going to be your more low-hanging fruit versus conferences. So once you speak at enough conferences and say, hey, I've spoken at these meetups, conferences will look at you a little bit differently. Also, publishing a book. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to, go the route of having a big book publisher. I was very fortunate that I was able to publish a book with O'Reilly. That'll be coming out very soon, Apache Iceberg, the definitive guide. But you can write, a pamphlet, let's say, 20, 30 pages, make it a PDF, and you can distribute it through something like an Amazon to make it a physical book, or you could just distribute that and then just say, hey, I am the author of this. Okay, and, use that as a benchmark. So, and then again, being the host of a podcast, even if no one listens to your podcast, being able to say, hey, I'm the host of X podcast is a thing you can claim to build your profile so that when you submit to a conference, the grandiosity of them being able to market you as a part of their event, because at the end of the day, their goal with it, most of these events are oftentimes going to be sort of corporate events, in the sense that like there's a particular business or brand that is organizing this event, and they have probably their 10 talks that they really want people to come there to see. But oftentimes people aren't there coming to an event to be like marketed to whatnot. That's not really what they want, but they will come to see other talks, and then they will kind of catch those other talks. So it becomes this thing, is like, if we can find these other talks that people are interested in, they'll come to see these other talks that are, a little bit more on, hey, I just want you to just know what we're doing kind of talks. So that's what you bring. That's what you need to bring to the table. You need to be a draw. They want interesting topics, but mostly they want topics from people who will bring people. So again, establishing your audience online. So having a strong like LinkedIn presence, Twitter presence, whatnot, is going to make you appealing as a speaker. Okay, why? Because they know that, hey, you're going to promote their event to your audience, so that's going to help you. Okay, again, having these sort of accolades that they can kind of promote, saying, hey, we have the speaker of this, we have the host of this being at our conference, or the writer of this, whatnot. Like giving them things that they can use to market you, because essentially part of it is your idea going to be something that people who are already coming to the event are interested in seeing, but also are you someone that people who are not coming to the event would come to the event specifically for. Okay, and you want to become that to increase the odds. And when you submit these applications to events, like that's sort of what you're thinking. And when you reach out to meetups, these are the ways you want to frame things. It's not like, hey, I just want to talk, will you have me on there? It's like, what do you bring to the table? Like, in the sense, like, if they have you at their meetup, are they going to get more meetup registrations and more people who will come to their future meetups to make it worth having on there? Because yes, people like to, I love to learn things. People, there's definitely a market there for knowledge, pure knowledge, regardless of attendance. But then that's generally going to be a better medium for like a podcast, because on a podcast, while for-profit podcasts do care about listenership, you could, again, just put out your presentation on YouTube, or put out your presentation or deliver whatever you want to say on a podcast and not have to worry about, and you can do that at pretty much zero cost without having to worry about any of these things. But oftentimes when you work with sort of people who are establishing something, they can bring you an audience that you wouldn't have, but they in exchange generally want you to bring an audience that they wouldn't have. Okay, it's a fair trade. Okay, and if you approach it like that and you start thinking, okay, how do I build my audience? It's always about building your audience, because that is how you get access to the audiences of other platforms, because you're essentially saying, hey, I'll expose you to my audience and you expose me to your audience. Once you start realizing like that's the mantra, then you start thinking, okay, how can I build my audience? How can I build my profile? And you start building those pieces for success. Because again, as a DevRel or Dev Advocate, basically the more exposure you get, the more exposure you can build for the product or brand that you're advocating for. Okay, if people are interested in listening to you, then they're going to be interested in listening to the product that you represent. Okay, but if they are not, then there's not much to say. So constantly just sort of having that sort of thought process of sort of like, okay, hey, how do I sort of brand myself? And again, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to be like a super sort of active social climber per se, but you have to kind of have that marketing mindset of sort of like, okay, on top of the product, I'm sort of like a sub product that's used to help deliver the product. So like, how do I market myself so I can highlight, and then of course, and then again, this is a little side point, but always despite that, like, if you're going to DevRel Dev Advocacy, make sure you're at a company whose product you can believe in. Okay, I'm fortunate to be at a company, Dremio, where I find the product really exciting, I find the space really exciting, and it becomes really easy for me to go talk about it and evangelize it and just scream at the rooftops because it's really, really cool. Okay, and what's possible is really, really cool, and what's coming is really, really cool. But if you can't feel the same way about the company that you're being a DevRel Dev Advocate at, and then it becomes a much harder job, because you can only evangelize what you believe in. Okay, you can create content. You can always create content teaching people things, but it's also about having that infectious enthusiasm that makes people enthusiastic about what you're saying. Okay, so now I've kind of got off the topic of speaking engagements, but again, those would be my tips. So my tips is like, if you've not done any speaking at all, start with like starting your own podcasts and doing videos on YouTube, because there's very little pressure. Okay, and then use that to kind of discover sort of what your voice is, what is the topic that sort of what is the interesting thing you have to say, by just saying different things until you kind of see something that sort of clicks that you feel comfortable with. Once you do that, start reaching out to meetups, pitching that particular topic, and then once you've kind of had a few meetups under your belt, you'll probably start seeing your applications on Sessionize begin to beef up, because you can begin reflecting on that. And again, at the same time, leverage titles that may seem insignificant to you, but again, from an outside looking in, can sound really cool. Again, you may be the host of a podcast. There may be 0 people listening to your podcast. It doesn't matter. You can still say, I'm the host of X podcast. Put out, self-publish a book. Maybe no one bought the book, but you can still say, hey, author of X book. These are things you can do that, one, create content. And like, of course, if you do a podcast, if you self-publish a book, make sure it's valuable content. But the idea is it's something that you can then point to as, hey, here's my contributions to the community that make you interesting. And that's sort of the name of the game. Okay. It could be a newsletter. So maybe you do, like a Substack newsletter. Again, the audience of any of these particular things doesn't matter, is more being able to say, hey, these are things I am doing, to point to sort of why people would be interested in listening to you. So those are generally my tips about just sort of getting into a cadence of speaking. Now, as far as like tips that make the flywheel a little bit easier, one thing with speaking is having to write abstracts. So as you might have your topic, you might have your presentation slides, and all that stuff's all well and good, but now you have to kind of write all these abstracts, and that gets really tedious. And this is a good place. This would generally be a place where I would say, hey, this is a good use of generative AI. So using something like a Google Gemini or ChatGPT to help you write an abstract of a talk that you've developed yourself, very, very good usage. Now, I wouldn't just say, hey, write me an abstract. What I would do is just kind of write a paragraph that kind of summarizes what you're trying to say as an abstract. And then generally you'll get something pretty decent on the other side, because you've kind of said what you wanted to say. You just maybe not have said it in a very refined way, and then the generative AI can sort of refine it for you. But again, if you just ask it to do things for you, it's oftentimes going to give you crap. Okay, and you're going to start noticing sort of like a lot of sort of very repetitive, nonsensical, non-valuable content being spat out that can hurt your reputation. So generally, when you're using generative AI to do things like talk abstracts, video descriptions, little small bits of writing like that. Still write the thing, just, you can kind of write a less refined version of it, just like a very rough draft, and then say, hey, turn this into this. Okay, and usually you'll find that kind of goes pretty far. Yeah. Okay, always kind of give it a raw version of what you want. Don't just ask it for what you want. Just as a side tip of effective use of generative AI, and then of course giving it any context of what you're saying. So don't just say, "Hey, rewrite this for me." Be like, I am doing a technical talk, and I need an abstract for this technical talk. Here is a rough draft. Can you make it better? Blah blah blah. A good prompt should be descriptive. Cool. I have another idea for another episode coming up soon. Also, I've come out with another podcast if you're interested about the open source data space, particularly things like Apache Iceberg, Nessie, Apache Arrow, called Catalogs, Manifests, and Metadata Oh My. So you can subscribe to that on your favorite podcast station. Also, all my podcasts are now being syndicated to YouTube. So you should be able to also find them if you subscribe to my different YouTube channels, depending on the content you're looking for. So overall, easier to find my content than ever before. And that's another thing you can leverage. You can leverage the fact that now there's YouTube podcasts, which is really cool. So essentially, if you're going to start a podcast, my recommendation is to use Spotify for podcasters. And basically there you can really easily manage a podcast for free. Okay, it used to be Anchor. But now Spotify has really sort of fused it into their platform, so it's pretty nice. But I would use that as my recommendation as far as the platform to use. And then what you do is you take the RSS feed, so you have to turn on the RSS feed. And then what you can do is you can then create a YouTube podcast, which then just takes any new episode you make, makes it that audio or video, and posts it to your YouTube channel. So that way you just get that additional reach for your podcast. So every time you essentially do an audio podcast, it's going to turn into a video on your YouTube and becomes a really easy way to deliver content. Chances are if you have a video podcast, I'm assuming YouTube would probably just upload the video. But generally all my podcasts are audio podcasts. So unsure if that's how that would work. But otherwise, you guys have a great day and enjoy.